There is a silence that lives in the space between a promise and its breaking. It's not the quiet of peace, or of emptiness. It's the dense, suffocating quiet of a door being softly closed, locking from the outside. A quiet where you can hear your own heartbeat become a stranger's rhythm. I know that silence. I lived inside it. This story begins not with a shout, but with a whisper, a vow spoken in tender darkness that would become the walls of a labyrinth only I could see. I will protect you from the world, he said. And I believed him. I didn't know then that the most dangerous thing in my world was about to become the man standing in its center. If you've ever trusted completely, only to find the ground you were standing on was someone else's instrument, this story is for you. Consider subscribing. The path through this labyrinth has many turns. The architecture was brilliant in its comfort. Every potential source of friction was smoothed away before I could even feel its grain. He managed the bills because finances stressed me out. He chose the restaurants because decision fatigue was real. He interpreted the moods of friends and family because he was so perceptive, so much better at reading people's true intentions. My world became smaller, warmer, and impeccably designed. I felt cherished, like a precious specimen in a perfect, climate-controlled exhibit. I never noticed the door locks were on the outside. I never felt the walls gently inch inward, millimeters each day, because he painted them with scenes of devotion. The first brick of a cage is always laid with a loving hand. The suffering, when it began, was so quiet it was almost elegant. It wasn't the sting of a slap, it was the dull, chronic ache of a bone slowly being compressed. It was the pain of a self being gently folded into a shape that fit a predesigned space. My opinions began to feel like rough, unsanded edges against the smooth finish of his logic. I'd voice a small desire, for a different movie, a visit to my sister, a career course, and he would listen with a patient, slightly concerned smile. Then he would dismantle it, not with anger, but with impeccable, loving reason. He'd lay out the traffic, the cost, the latent futility, the hidden emotional tax, until my own desire sat between us like a foolish, childish whim. The victory in his eyes wasn't cruel, it was the satisfaction of a guardian who had once again steered his charge away from a cliff. The beginning felt like a solution to a problem I hadn't even known I was carrying. It was in the way he listened, not just to my words, but to the spaces between them. He heard the faint, untuned hum of anxiety that had always been my background noise, and he promised, not to erase it, but to stand guard against it. He saw the sharp edges of the world and offered himself as a buffer. In the first days, the first months, it was a relief so profound it felt like sinking into a warm bath after a lifetime of shivering. Here, at last, was shelter. I handed him the blueprints to my fears, and he said he would build us a fortress. And he did. He built it with the bricks of his own certainty. He began to curate my world, not with a heavy hand, but with the tender precision of a conservator protecting a fragile artifact. You don't need to deal with that stressful drive, let me take you, he'd say, and my keys would find a new home on his ring. That friend always leaves you feeling drained, don't you think, he'd muse, and slowly, my phone would grow quieter. He framed our isolation not as a withdrawal, but as an elevation. We were purer, he said. More focused on what really mattered, us. Our shared reality became the only valid one, and he was its gentle, reliable curator. The outside world began to sound like static, loud, meaningless, and harsh. Inside our fortress, the silence was soft, and it smelled like his cologne and the coffee he made me just the way I liked it. I learned a new grammar. I think became you think, and I feel became we feel. My internal compass, once calibrated by my own experiences, began to spin wildly, reliant on his magnetic north to find true. The dread was not a storm, it was a fog. It was waking up and not knowing what might subtly disappoint him today, what small aspect of myself would be identified as a risk he needed to manage. The sound of his key in the lock was both a promise of relief and a trigger of low-grade panic, relief because his presence would define the reality of the evening, panic because I had to ensure my reality matched his before I greeted him. The scent of our home, once so comforting, carried the faint, metallic odor of my own quiet erosion. And through it all, the foundation of the promise held. He was protecting me. From confusion, from poor choices, from a world too chaotic for my sensitive spirit. He framed every limitation as a moat he was digging to keep the dragons out. I couldn't see that I was slowly becoming the treasure in the tower, polished, immobilized, and utterly alone. The tragedy was not one of dramatic cruelty, but of a love that loved the idea of me so much it was willing to erase the substance of me to preserve it. The protector had become the sole source of the peril, and the fortress had become an anatomy of my own disappearance. Language is the first weapon and the last casualty. It begins with a shift in vocabulary, so subtle it feels like a dialect of love. We, that absorbs an I. Let's, that means, you will. The promises of protection evolved into a system of laws, unspoken but as binding as steel. He didn't shout decrees, he edited reality. A comment about a dress became a lesson in modesty. A text message from an old friend was analyzed not for its content, but for its hidden threat to our peace. My history was gently rewritten, my past joys framed as naivete, my old sorrows as proof of a fragility that required his constant management. The story of my life became a manuscript he held, and his pen was always poised, ready to make a clarifying note in the margin. The control practiced itself in the quietest theaters. Money, of course. It started as practicality. Your account is so stressful with all those small transactions, let me consolidate things for us. The logic was a warm blanket. But then, the blanket became a straitjacket. An ATM receipt with a $20 withdrawal required a gentle, curious inquiry. Story session, he called it. Was I unhappy? Did I need something I wasn't telling him? The questions weren't angry, they were wounded, concerned. Each dollar spent became a unit of accountability, a tiny rebellion he needed to understand and, therefore, forgive. My financial autonomy didn't vanish in a blaze of confrontation, it dissolved in the acid drip of his nurturing anxiety. I began to fear the rustle of a shopping bag, the sound of a receipt printing, more than any actual scarcity. And then, the body. The most personal geography of all. It was framed in the language of health, of admiration, of optimal living. A second helping was met with a slow, appreciative smile and a comment on my brave appetite. A skipped gym day prompted a tender, logistical discussion about our shared goals for longevity and wellness. He became the curator of my energy, my nutrition, my sleep. My physical being was no longer my own domain, it was a shared project, a testament to our joint discipline. To want something else, a late night, a sugary dessert, a moment of indolence, wasn't just a personal choice, it was a betrayal of the us he was tirelessly building. The personal tragedy was absolute. I lived in a body that had become a display case for his principles of care. The true masterpiece of this control was its moral framework. He was never the villain in his own story, he was the martyr to the cause of us. My flickers of resistance, my quiet tears of frustration, were not signals of his failure, but proof of the external corruption he was fighting against. Look what the world has done to you, he'd sigh, holding me as I cried from the sheer, nameless pressure of it all. It's made you think you have to fight even me. I'm on your side. I'm for you. And in those moments, the labyrinth doubled back on itself. The walls weren't his construction, they were the remnants of a cruel world he was shielding me from. My desire to escape was diagnosed as a symptom of the very sickness he was curing. The isolation was now complete, but it felt like sanctity. Friends who expressed concern were toxic, jealous of our bond. Family who asked questions were enmeshed, unable to respect healthy boundaries. He had a term for everything, a clinical, logical shell for every hard emotion. My loneliness was reframed as our profound connection, needing no external validation. The sound of my own voice, when I dared to use it in disagreement, became a foreign, shrill noise to my own ears, the hysteria, he patiently waited out before offering a rational solution. The dread solidified into a constant, low hum, the background radiation of a life lived under a benevolent microscope. I was suffering, but I was suffering correctly, for the sake of a greater, purer love. The final, devastating practice was the economy of gratitude. Every restriction, every critique, every rewriting of my will was packaged as a sacrifice he was making. The emotional labor of controlling our entire universe was his burden, born out of love. My role was to be grateful, to be the peaceful, happy reward for his tireless stewardship. To be sad was ungrateful. To be angry was a profound betrayal. The love I had once breathed freely now came in measured inhalations, each one a transaction. He had taken the chaos of a human heart and imposed a devastating, airless order upon it. I was living inside a sonnet he had written, beautiful in its structure, agonizing in its constraints, with every line leading back to him. This is the dangerous, morally ambiguous heart of the labyrinth. To paint him as a monster is to misunderstand the architecture completely, and to provide a simple villain the viewer can safely hate from a distance. The truth is far more corrosive. He believed in his own goodness. His love was not a lie, it was a conviction so absolute it became a tyranny. In his mind, he was the steadfast captain of a ship sailing through a stormy world, and my occasional desire to steer was not a shared responsibility, but a dangerous lapse in trust that risked us both. This chapter is not an exoneration. It is an autopsy of a love that killed by suffocation, not by violence. It lives in the space where good intentions are not just insufficient, they are the very fuel for the engine of control. Consider his kindness. It was not a tactic, it was his currency. The morning coffee, the warmed towel after a shower, the meticulous way he remembered every childhood story I ever told him. These were not the calculated moves of a schemer. They were the offerings of a man building a shrine. And that was the trap. How do you revolt against devotion? How do you declare war on someone who is, by every observable measure, tending to your life with the reverence of a gardener? The conflict it creates within the victim is a special kind of madness. You sit in the prison of his affection, screaming inside your own mind, while the walls whisper back to you in his voice, "You are so loved. Why are you so unhappy?" It makes you doubt the very sensations of your own soul. Your pain becomes a form of ingratitude. And his logic, it was a fortress in itself. He wasn't irrational, he was hyperrational. Every rule, every boundary, every redirection of my life could be traced back to a core principle of protection, efficiency, or mutual betterment. He wove a web of cause and effect so impeccable that to disagree was to reveal yourself as emotional, unstable, or foolish. There was no yelling match to win, no dramatic injustice to point to. There was only the cold, clean surface of his reasoning against the messy, trembling intuition of my own being. He didn't silence me with his fist, he silenced me with the overwhelming, loving weight of his better judgment. This is the ambiguity that will haunt the comments, the debate over whether a cage built with impeccable logic and genuine concern is still a cage. Can a person be both your sanctuary and your warden? He saw a version of me that was so perfect, so pristine, it was paralyzing. I was his masterpiece in progress, and my own rough, human desires were flaws in the marble that needed his skilled hand to chisel away. In his love, I was an idea, the ideal partner, the protected woman, the curated life. He was in love with the potential of me, a potential only he could see and shepherd into being. The tragedy is that this kind of love murders the actual, present-tense person. It cannot bear the reality of a changing mind, a bad mood, a spontaneous, unoptimal desire. My sovereignty, the messy, glorious, and flawed right to be myself, was the one threat his love could not tolerate. He had to conquer it to save it. So we arrive at the central, devastating question: can a person be a hero and an oppressor in the same story? From his perspective, every act of control was a rescue. Every no was a shield. My dwindling friendships were toxic influences removed. My shrinking world was a sacred space created. My silent compliance was finally, blissfully, the peace he had always wanted for me. He was the hero who had slain the dragons of my independence, my chaos, my unpredictability. He would look at me, quiet and pliant, and see his victory. He saw a saved woman. I felt like a ghost haunting the beautiful life he had built for me. This is the profound moral vertigo this story forces upon us. It forces us to sit with the fact that the most absolute forms of control are often baptized in the waters of sacrifice and called love. This chapter offers no verdict. It only presents the chilling landscape. It asks you to consider the love that holds on so tightly it strangles, the protection that so completely surrounds it becomes a tomb. The argument in the comments will rage, but he loved her. He did everything for her. And the devastating reply, yes. That was the problem. The greatest prisons are not built of hatred, but of a warped, all-consuming devotion that mistakes ownership for stewardship, and sees a person not as a sovereign self, but as the most precious territory to be conquered and secured. This is the dangerous, morally ambiguous heart of the labyrinth. To paint him as a monster is to misunderstand the architecture completely, and to provide a simple villain the viewer can safely hate from a distance. The truth is far more corrosive. He believed in his own goodness. His love was not a lie, it was a conviction so absolute it became a tyranny. In his mind, he was the steadfast captain of a ship sailing through a stormy world, and my occasional desire to steer was not a shared responsibility, but a dangerous lapse in trust that risked us both. This chapter is not an exoneration. It is an autopsy of a love that killed by suffocation, not by violence. It lives in the space where good intentions are not just insufficient, they are the very fuel for the engine of control. Consider his kindness. It was not a tactic, it was his currency. The morning coffee, the warmed towel after a shower, the meticulous way he remembered every childhood story I ever told him. These were not the calculated moves of a schemer. They were the offerings of a man building a shrine. And that was the trap. How do you revolt against devotion? How do you declare war on someone who is, by every observable measure, tending to your life with the reverence of a gardener? The conflict it creates within the victim is a special kind of madness. You sit in the prison of his affection, screaming inside your own mind, while the walls whisper back to you in his voice, "You are so loved. Why are you so unhappy?" It makes you doubt the very sensations of your own soul. Your pain becomes a form of ingratitude. And his logic, it was a fortress in itself. He wasn't irrational, he was hyperrational. Every rule, every boundary, every redirection of my life could be traced back to a core principle of protection, efficiency, or mutual betterment. He wove a web of cause and effect so impeccable that to disagree was to reveal yourself as emotional, unstable, or foolish. There was no yelling match to win, no dramatic injustice to point to. There was only the cold, clean surface of his reasoning against the messy, trembling intuition of my own being. He didn't silence me with his fist, he silenced me with the overwhelming, loving weight of his better judgment. This is the ambiguity that will haunt the comments, the debate over whether a cage built with impeccable logic and genuine concern is still a cage. Can a person be both your sanctuary and your warden? The geography of after is one of ghostly architecture. You will walk through a world haunted by triggers invisible to everyone else. A certain tone of voice from a new partner will send you into a freeze. A well-meaning suggestion will taste like control, and you will react with a fury that seems disproportionate, because it is the fury of 1,000 suppressed no's finally finding a voice. Trust is not a gift you can give, it is a country you view from a great distance, its borders closed to you. You build a new life, but you build it like a fortress, checking every brick for his fingerprints. The love you might one day dare to welcome will have to speak a gentle, patient dialect you are still learning to understand. It will have to prove, over and over, that it is not a scout for a new occupation. And what of him? In your absence, he is likely still the hero of his story. You have become the tragic, confused figure who abandoned salvation, the one he couldn't save. There is no closure to be found in his understanding, for he never spoke your language. The closure, if it comes, is a quiet, private settlement you reach with yourself. It is the day you realize your nostalgia is not for him, but for the illusion of safety he sold you. It is the moment a song comes on, or a season changes, and you feel a simple, unmediated joy, and you do not feel compelled to report it, or filter it, or thank anyone for permitting it. It is yours. A tiny, reclaimed sovereign territory. This story does not end with a victory parade. It ends with a woman standing in a field of her own making, under a vast and indifferent sky, learning how to breathe the thin, free air. It ends with the understanding that the aftermath is not a destination, but the ground upon which a new, fragile self must be built. The walls of the labyrinth may be gone, but you will always carry its blueprint within you, not as a prison, but as a map of where you have been, and a solemn warning of the terrain you will never again agree to inhabit. You are not unscathed. You are not the person you were before. But you are, finally, the architect. And the next world you build will have doors that open from the inside. That blueprint I carry, it's not just a memory. It's a kind of knowledge written in the scars. It's the knowledge that the most dangerous promises aren't the ones whispered in malice, they're the ones spoken in the tender, convincing dark, by someone who believes them completely. It's the understanding that love should be a sanctuary, not a sovereignty. A partnership, not a principality. If this journey through the architecture of control resonated with you, if you've ever felt the walls gently close in under the guise of care, then you understand why stories like this need to be told. They map the hidden territories of emotional captivity, so others might recognize the landscape before the doors lock. Your engagement turns these reflections into a conversation. If this narrative held you, please like the video. It tells the algorithm this is a story worth sharing with others who might need to hear it. And if you want to join us as we navigate the complex geographies of human relationships, power, and the long road back to selfhood, consider subscribing. We have so many more maps to study together. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Remember, the most important door is the one to your own sovereignty. Make sure it opens from the inside.